Hi, Shelley here with the daily transit, as usual mood. And today I would like to talk about the moon on the galactic center, sextiling Saturn in Aquarius, and Saturn's kind of around Deneb Algadi. Not sure if it's exact right now. The moon on the galactic center is a prominent point. Sidereally, it's Scorpio. It's like between Scorpio and Sagittarius, and it's the galactic center. So it's a very central place, getting for manifestation, for transformation. Again, it's a transient. It's a transient transit, so only a couple of hours. Right now the moon is there, so if you catch this video right now, then that applies. And the sextile to Saturn, again, Saturn brings restrictions, but it's the intent of Saturn, especially at the home sign, is basically to delay gratification until you get something done right. So with Sagittarius, there's a certain transformation, a transformative process that you're already going through, and that is kind of triggered. It could be also, because it's the house of the previous eclipses, it could be also something that happened about a year ago or a year and a half ago, when the eclipses were on the Sagittarius and Gemini house, depending on where it is, in your own chart. So it could still be triggering those lightly. And Saturn gives a certain sort of structure to that process from the Aquarius perspective. So let's say with Sagittarius, with the galactic center, you're perhaps breaking out of something, breaking out of a mental habit or a deeply psychological habit that you've had. And it's kind of when you go out of somewhere, imagine a person, going out of jail. So in jail, they had a lot of restrictions. But then Saturn in Aquarius is the restrictions that they're going to have outside of jail. Not necessarily because, people who actually restrict people who come out of jail are coming from the regime. But there are certain sort of delays of gratifications and restrictions that are going to be from that place that you got liberated into. Think about the separation process of the child and the mother, or the parent. So the parent poses certain restrictions, and then the Sagittarius point is kind of like I'm going out. I'm going to travel. I'm going to explore the big world. The Aquarius is going to be where that person is running to. The open space. The restrictions from the outside world. So let's say they have Sagittarius, in the 9th, and then Aquarius would be the 11th. So they travel somewhere, and they want to have a goal there. They want to have to build something there. But then the colleagues in the society, or they have to go through a certain peer review process. And the goals in the society, in the mass society, kind of poses a certain culture or a certain, perhaps, distance. The restriction is of distance. Unless it's in one of, it's in the 8th house or the 12th house, where the restriction can actually be people who pose certain restrictions on your ability to transform in these houses. But those restrictions are kind of meant to spiritually guide you to a certain sort of diligence in your spiritual quest. For the sextile, it means that the restriction that you get from Saturn is, if you are aware, is actually saving you from going through that deep transformation and then, kind of ending up lost and confused, but in another, the jail of the outside instead of the jail of the inside. And Saturn then around Deneb Algadi. Deneb Algadi is about resources. It's policing something. So it's kind of making sure that you stay well behaved. Let's say, right now with the crisis, a lot of people are living in the streets. And to live in the streets, a lot of people do have to steal food because what they get for the nation is not always enough, or they have to run away for someplace. So Saturn is kind of like guarding them that they won't now become a part of some gang who steals, I don't know, property from people. Or they don't steal, from people. They can steal from the supermarket, or they're going to steal what they need to get by, but they're not going to be releasing their moral habits so much so that they're going to have a problem with Deneb Algadi later. So that can be a form of restriction. It's like, okay, now you have to do this, now you have to do that. Or it can be a provider. Like for me with Saturn around Deneb Algadi, I found a new source of food around my neighborhood so that I didn't have to steal from the supermarket. Whereas currently I don't, so it's kind of like, oh wow, that's lovely, because I was asking so badly to not have to do these things because it was draining, it was draining for me. So it's a very transient effect. It's very good to pay attention to the kind of challenges you're running into in the outside world. What are you currently, challenged by? Maybe you think, oh, I escaped this inner jail or external circumstances. I traveled. I chose a new path. Let's say I left the academia for a spiritual retreat, and now I get limitations there. Now I get something like I was expecting freedom and enlightenment, but it doesn't come immediate, and something not quite happening. Or maybe you took psychedelics to experience an out-of-body experience or a near-death experience, and you're not feeling it. So the Saturn is kind of blocking something, delaying something, guarding you, that you're going to experience this freedom, but you need to adhere to certain limitations so that you wouldn't get totally lost, so that you would gain the benefit of liberation that the moon on the galactic center is trying to bring you. It's a very positive restriction, and the moon on the galactic center opposition your Mercury house, your Mercury Gemini house. So there's a certain sort of balance perhaps that you need to bring to that axis of the Gemini, the local, the small liberations, the small conversations, the small talk, the connectivity, your local connections, and your outerworldly or international connections with Sagittarius. It can be, if it's the first and seventh axis, it can be the balance between being alone and being with my partners, business or otherwise. So let's say, you are all, or you broke up from a certain relationship, and I was like, oh, you're all alone. But then you have to confront a certain sort of partnership, which you could even be the neighbor next door. This is also a seventh house. And you're like, oh, but I have this restriction. With the sextile, you might not feel that restriction is terrible. You might feel that, oh, thanks God I have something that's that I'm not totally alone. Or thanks God I have this help from Saturn and Deneb Algadi, because in the case of the example of having to steal when you're traveling, it can be like, okay, now you have this, fridge that is for the people, so you can take from that. So it may limit, because in the past you're like, okay, if I have to steal, then you would take that food or take something else, or make it a joke or make it a satire, and now you're sort of like having to limit yourself to that particular food, but that particular food can be very nourishing. Like for me, I found vegetables that I didn't like. I would get like either one or two vegetables, and now I could get like a whole bag of vegetables, and it was like, oh, but that's the food that I need right now. That's what I need to have more of. So that was something that was like, okay, so now I cannot just take anything that I desire, but also I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. This is such a blessing. And then with the sextile, it's something that you're going to be thankful for. It's a restriction that you're going to be thankful for. In any case, if you talk about the square, like with Uranus, it can be a restriction that eventually you need to deal with, that Saturn need to deal with. But with the square, Saturn has a lot to learn. With the square, Saturn is less open because it's attacked. Like Saturn, Uranus, it's kind of like, it's an argumentative form of refining, liberation. Because the elderly, as I said, the elderly or the people in power are going to try to impose a restriction, and Saturn is also, because it's so conservative, it's fear to let go, fear to change, although it is about letting go. One aspect that it's about letting go. So with the square, you get this argumentative, rebellious. You rebel against Saturn, you kind of force Saturn to see that the king is naked in this or that aspect. And then Saturn says, okay, but you're naked too. And then there can be like a mutual transformation, but it goes through arguments, it goes through even explosive anger sometimes, and frustrations. With a sextile to Saturn, it is a refinement of some sort. Like right now, Venus in Gemini is trining Saturn. And I think I spoke about this transit where Venus in Gemini is, again, very flirtatious, very verbal, very open-minded, and, it's a sign of two beings, so it's undecisive. And Saturn puts a restriction on that. It's like you can only do so much, but because it's a trine, it's going to be something in your favor. If you adhere to the Saturn in Danab Algad, you can also have your resources guarded. You can also receive a certain sort of sobriety in terms of your nervous system, or scientific thought, or scientific processes. Because again, it's a trine. It's not going to be something you resist so much. It's not going to be something that frustrates you so much. It's going to be a necessary adhering to certain sort of either authority or guardianship, or rules that govern the universe, and that can also be with the galactic center and Saturn, because Sagittarius tropically is about higher learning. It's about philosophy. So it can be something in the philosophy of science that you're studying with the sextile to Saturn. You're like, oh, let's say you've been out of certain scientific dogma, and you turn to the spiritual world, and you're like, okay, but how do you know that you intuit the right way? How do you know who are involved, which consciousnesses are involved in that mass consciousness that Aquarius brings? And that can be the wisdom of the masses, but the masses can be wrong too. And Saturn there is kind of like, well, you do need to maintain your careful observation, and you do need to maintain a healthy sense of not knowing what it's all about, and the ability to be changed, and rather have, the Feynman saying, I'd rather have a question that's not answered and an answer that cannot be questioned. That can also be a transit effect of that, where you genuinely understand that. You genuinely understand that even when you're channeling, even when you're doing divination, even when you're intuiting, it's not a bulletproof process for excavating the truth. And I think it's very positive in general. This is a transit effect, but to have something like this with more with a slower planet can be very beneficial for the process of uniting spirituality and science. So that is the mood for today. Very sober, very sovereign, and a refinement of your sobriety and sovereignty in regarding to higher philosophical faculties, philosophy of science, your cognitive versus intuitive abilities, and whatnot. So you do want to do some contemplation around this. If you're planning a trip or planning to travel, this is a blessed transit for your planning, because it's going to show you what you need to tackle without scolding you about it. Like Saturn would do with Aquarius. Saturn would scold Aquarius, and Aquarius would say, well, the king is naked, and then they would have to go to have this back and forth, so that everyone is transformed and everyone is changed. And with Saturn changes, even at home, of the very spacious Aquarius, it's still a change. It's still a dogma that Saturn has to ease, while Uranus has to accommodate for in the new paradigm shift, so that they don't throw the baby with the cradle. So that was it for me. Subscribe for more videos. I am also on Instagram, Shirley Youngblood, and on Twitter, it's Tali Shear. If you do like to receive a reading from me, I currently accept Bitcoin or Ethereum, and that would be $50. Right now, reading is not channeling, it's simply astrological reading, which allows me to do it in $50 because I don't have to debate my guidance on the price. And for every fully priced reading, I also make place for a subsidized reading, and you can also register to have a subsidized reading or a fully subsidized reading if you cannot afford currently $50 for a reading, and you do need that. So I'll see you on my next video. Have a blessed day, and enjoy nature and enjoy the open space cautiously.